So the Ethiopians have released their report on the crash of that 737 MAX that fell out of the sky for seemingly no reason a few weeks ago. And the headline looks pretty great for Boeing. It says that Boeing was not at fault, they concluded. However, they also said that the pilots did nothing wrong in trying to stabilize the plane when they were flying it. The report concluded that the entire crew performed exactly as Boeing instructed. And they also found no evidence that any sort of debris, like, geese or something, flew into the engines and, stalled the plane. So ultimately, the report does conclude that it was the plane's fault, though, interestingly, not Boeing's fault. They say that the anti-stall software engaged 4 times, and that each time the pilots struggled for 6 minutes to get the plane's nose up, because apparently the anti-stall software has the plane, point its nose down and try and catch some more air. Because for those of you who don't know, when you fly an airplane, if it gets below a certain speed, it won't be able to, keep flying. It'll just sort of fall straight down and drop instead of gliding through the air. So the plane has this software that'll point the nose of the plane down so that you can gain some more speed, and then hopefully not stall the plane and drop like a rock. And this software overrides the pilot's control. So this software, despite the pilots fighting with it for 6 minutes and managing to keep the plane in the air, ultimately the software pointed the nose of the plane down and kept the plane descending until they crashed into the ground. Now, despite what the report concludes, that would sound to me like this is completely Boeing's fault if it was their software that killed 157 people or something. Considering how highly anticipated this report was, I would be shocked if Boeing wasn't over in Ethiopia lobbying the investigators as this report was being written. So despite the fact that the investigators on the ground may have discovered that this was all because of Boeing's software, the guys at the top, people who perhaps were being wined and dined in expensive restaurants by Boeing staff, they decided to put in that line about how Boeing was not in fault into the conclusion and hope that would be good enough. But it's fairly easy for ordinary people to see through that kind of deception, and I think it seems pretty obvious that the conclusion is not entirely reflective of the report as a whole. But luckily for Boeing, the people that they're reporting, that they're targeting with this sort of distortion of the report are not ordinary people like me, who have no stake in their company, who don't buy their planes, and who don't own their stock. What they're trying to do is they are trying to target investors with this information, because Boeing has had a problem that there was a huge sell-off in their stock after these 2 crashes, so they need people to buy back. And lucky for Boeing, investors are dopes, and they look for any reason to buy stock. So as terrible as this report is for Boeing, if you're being an honest person, from an investor standpoint, this is probably bullish for Boeing. Because even if an individual investor, him or herself, can recognize that this report pretty clearly says that Boeing was at fault here, they might buy just on the chance that other people perceive this report as positive. So even if nobody perceives it as positive, as long as there's a chance that someone might perceive it as positive, well, then that's bullish, because they're looking for any reason to buy stocks. We see evidence of this from just a night or 2 ago, in which Boeing released a statement saying, hey guys, guess what? Great news. We've already revamped the anti-stall software, and we just had a test flight, and guess what? Nobody died. Now, an ordinary person may think, hey, that's a pretty low bar. You took off, you flew a plane and nobody died. Well, of course, this was bullish for Boeing stock, and they saw a great big rally after that. Now, this Ethiopian report, as doctored as it may appear, also gives cover to Boeing's pets at the FAA, who desperately want to conclude that Boeing can do no wrong. The FAA bided its time and tried so hard not to ground the 737 MAX, even as the rest of the world saw that they were extremely dangerous, until finally having to give in, despite being bought and paid for by Boeing themselves. But thankfully, for their sake, the FAA can now point to the conclusion of this Ethiopian report and say, see, Boeing is the greatest company ever to exist in the world, not just in America. They likely will have some big, expensive investigation that they're going to hype up in their new joint task force that they entered into with NASA and some other agencies. But ultimately, the FAA, even if some of the other agencies try to be more independent and point out some of the faults with Boeing software, the FAA will do exactly what the Ethiopians did and insert into the conclusion some line that exonerates Boeing of all responsibility and is, of course, in the end, bullish for their stock. So that about wraps it up for today. If you got anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And don't forget to click the bell so that you see that I upload every day. And I hope to see you back here tomorrow.